Good evening, everybody. My name is Todd Scholl. I serve as the Director of Wellness and Communications at the Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. We call ourselves Cool, and you can learn everything you want to learn about Cool right here on this website, cewl.us. That's cool.us. And on there, you'll see all the live streams that we do, all the content that our members create, and whether it's videos or writing, all of our cool coaching initiatives and induction program initiatives. You can find all of that on the website. So we want to invite you to check us out there. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the South Carolina Education Association, which is the state affiliate for the National Education Association, which is the largest labor union in the country with over 3 million educators. And if you're interested in joining us, you can join the SCEA at jointhescea.org and that website right there. And so we want to make sure that we give them a huge shout out to President Dina Cruz and the entire staff and board and all the members of the SCEA. Thank you so much for everything you do to support public education in the state of South Carolina. Well, a few months ago, a gentleman by the name of Blake Easter reached out to me and said that he would like to appear on a live stream to promote some work that he's doing, and it's not something we typically cover here, but I felt like it was really important, and so I was excited to bring him on and really interested to hear what he has to say. Blake is a prevention education program coordinator for the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force. He's responsible for supporting efforts in the upstate and the Midlands area of the state. In this role, he's responsible for successfully implementing TraffickProof South Carolina in middle schools, high schools, and youth serving groups and organizations. In collaboration with the prevention education team, he designs, implements, and evaluates TraffickProof SC and other relevant programming and outreach opportunities. He is also the lead on topics related to trauma and education, as well as work with special populations. Prior to joining this task force, Blake taught social studies and special education for 9 years. He's also led efforts to introduce his school's first social emotional learning curriculum. And in that capacity, he conducted weekly lessons on self awareness, goal setting, healthy relationships, and more. In 2023, Blake was awarded Teacher of the Year from his school leadership. He's a certified restorative justice education facilitator from RJ Ed. He has a bachelor's degree in sociology with a concentration in social work from the University of South Carolina, Aiken, and a master's degree in trauma-informed education from Columbia College. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is Blake Easter. Blake, how are you doing tonight?
I'm quite well, thank you.
Is there anything on that I missed on your bio or any mistakes I made? Anything you want to add for those listening to tonight to learn more about Blake Easter?
No, I was just thinking it's kind of long. They had us write a whole like one-page bio, and I'm always like back here blushing when people list my accomplishments. Um, I will say for people who are not from the upstate or Midlands, I am temporarily in charge of everything in the state.
Okay.
The other prevention educator, like since we've last talked, accepted a job elsewhere, so I'm temporarily everywhere. Don't worry about boundaries. Don't worry about any of that kind of stuff. Just call me if you need me.
So before we dive in, I know you have a presentation. I just want to, I don't know exactly what you're going to be, all the content you're going to be covering tonight. Do we need to do any trigger warnings, or is there anything that you want folks to know before we present this information?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Yeah, just general content warning. Um, a lot of our work involves human trafficking, so there is going to be some talk of child sexual abuse. We're not going to get too graphic in it, but that does kind of loom over everything we do. So I do like people to know that in advance.
Yeah, it's a I think this is one of those topics people hear about, but it's almost like you don't really want to think about it because you don't want to believe that it actually exists. But it does. And so I think it's really important that educators and really everybody in our communities across South Carolina are aware of, have a basic awareness of what trafficking is so that we can try to, prevent it, disrupt it if it's happening, and really protect kids and really all human beings from this horrible thing that's happening in our country. So Blake, I'm gonna do. Are you ready to for me to bring up your presentation?
Yes, I'm good to go.
Okay. All right, here we go.
All right. So, thank you for that awesome introduction. Like you said, we are talking about TraffickProof SC. I work with the State Human Trafficking Task Force. It's what I do for a living. I always remind people, I can't see your faces right now, but when I do these kind of things, if you need to take a breather, grab a drink of water, something like that. I'm not going to get into like super grisly details, but we are going to talk about some of this stuff just as an overview to understand things. So, we're going to look at defining human trafficking. It is something that is talked about a lot, but we'll talk about some of the ways that it is discussed, which may not be, some of the most helpful. We're going to identify some common myths about human trafficking. We're going to talk about some trends in South Carolina. We did just drop our annual report, I believe, last week. It feels like we've been working on it forever, but that is public now, so we can talk about that data as well. And then we're going to talk about our prevention education initiative and just what else educators can do. I don't want to throw all this stuff at you and just leave you feeling this like pit of despair. I do want to remind you that there are resources, there are things you can do in your position to help, and I can do to help you as well. So our prevention education team, we have our task force director, Monique Garvin. You've got me, and we are going to be posting that vacancy pretty soon. But until then, it's me. It's me over the entire state. Little overview of the state task force and what we do, just so we kind of understand where I'm coming from. We do have regional task forces in every area. If you go to our website, you can check and find yours. People sometimes want to ask, like, what can I do to help? And short of us, hiring on new people, I always recommend people check their regional task force. We go to these meetings, we have a representative at these meetings, and we like to hear what's going on county by county, city by city, just so we can better help people. I went to college at USC Aiken, and even when I go to the Aiken meetings, I'm learning all these new things about Aiken that I didn't realize because I didn't go out that much. So it is very much a top-down approach. We like to go from but also we have the grassroots as well, kind of informing us from the bottom up, all of the stuff that's going on in their communities. So by all means, if you're in one of these areas, you should have a task force, or these two areas will have one launching very soon. Likewise, I don't need to read all these, but we have all these different disciplines that we focus on too. We recognize that healthcare plays a role, education plays a role, law enforcement plays a role. We'll kind of talk about some of the stuff that we do with law enforcement as well later in this presentation. But just recognizing that every sector can play their role because every sector sees different things than other sectors do. Now, all that said, again, human trafficking, it's talked about a lot. We always remind people that there are instances, certainly, of creepy white vans and people being held and chained up and tied up and all that stuff. We're not saying that doesn't happen. However, the data doesn't support that that is the majority of cases. And if all we're looking for is creepy white vans and it's some sort of like taken situation, where these evil, I haven't seen it, but these like evil people are coming to the suburbs to take children. Again, we're not saying that never, ever, ever happens, but we are going to miss a vast majority of these cases if that's all we're looking out for. I was a 90s kid. I was very much raised on the whole stranger danger thing. And a lot of us know now with the whole stranger danger panic, the data doesn't really support that, unfortunately. 90+% of crimes done to children, whether that's sexual abuse, whether that's kidnapping, whether that is human trafficking, is at the hands of someone they know. So if we're just looking out for the creepy white vans and stranger danger, we're going to miss a lot of other things. So all that said, now I have a prettier slide. Let me do this one. Human trafficking is when an individual under force, fraud, or coercion is made to perform commercial sex acts or forced labor. Pause, because there's a huge asterisk in this for educators. For those of us working with people 18 and under, or under 18, when an individual induced to perform sex acts is under 18 years old, that is automatically human trafficking. We will not need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. If the word child prostitute, sort of enters your mind, just know that legally that is not a thing anymore. We passed a law in 2024 making it even more clear. We did kind of gently nudge that law along to exist that you cannot charge a child with solicitation, prostitution, none of those offenses. Can't even try it. So again, if you have an instance where you hear about maybe a child you're working with who is doing certain things in exchange for anything, we'll talk about it, money, goods, luxury services. Again, that is not a quote unquote child prostitute. That is a victim of human trafficking. And then the other part of this definition is that anything of value has to be given, promised to, received directly or indirectly by any person.
Mm.
I went through a crash course on this because I did have a situation involving a student, and I really didn't have a great understanding of human trafficking at the time as a classroom teacher. But we will say one of the hard things with kids, and it certainly was the case with this child I was working with, they don't always know when that's happening. So it could be an
Okay.
adult giving something to another adult in exchange for then what they do to this child. So they may not be aware that that's something of value is going on. Now, force, fraud, coercion. I teach this to middle and high schoolers all the time. The short version is just force is anything done to the body, hitting, kicking, kidnapping, all that kind of stuff. That is the easiest to spot. Unfortunately, that is, of these three, typically the rarest one that we see. What we see more often is fraud. That's any sort of lie. That can be someone in your DMs offering you this dream job. I always tell people I work for the Attorney General's office, and that's hard because I am a blabbermouth. But I can say that a sheriff's department has gotten in touch with us regarding a woman who came here from Florida. She was offered, I believe, something like $5,000 a night, like some really high amount to clean hotels.
Mm.
And that did not turn out to be the case. That was not what this job was. She was then put in a situation where she couldn't leave. They took away her documentation. She was, a legal US citizen. They took her documentation, they took her paperwork so she can't leave, and then also made some threats towards her too, to intimidate her into staying.
Mm.
So any sort of lie that gets someone there or keeps someone there. We always tell people if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Mm.
Um, Last one, this is the most common one that we see, is coercion. This is anything done that's like emotional manipulation. So threats to the victim and or their family, debt bondage, psychological abuse, all that sort of stuff. One of the things we're working with right now with both law enforcement and judges is making sure they understand if we're dealing with, say, a gang issue. And maybe someone's in a gang and they're selling drugs, but they're doing so under threats of violence. That still constitutes labor trafficking, even if the kind of work they're doing is illegal, like dealing drugs. If there is that coercion, if someone's saying you have to sell X amount of drugs by the end of the week, or we're going to hurt you, we're going to hurt your family, that is labor trafficking. That is coercion. That is not that person operating under their usual free will.
Got it.
And again, we like to emphasize this for teachers too, because if you happen to know someone who's in a gang and maybe doing these activities under threat of force, fraud, or coercion, again, that is a human trafficking victim. That is not a criminal, and the law does make these clear distinctions between the two. Anything of value can be anything. First thing I had up there was books, because I do this a lot at colleges as well, and we know
Yeah.
those textbooks are really expensive.
Yeah.
This part of the law is written very vague because it's meant to be subjective. One thing we're seeing right now is vapes. Vapes are a very common something of value. At the time this law was written, I'm not sure vapes existed yet. So they wouldn't have known to put that in there. But that's,
Yeah.
again, why this part is vague. So it can be rent, it can be a place to stay, it can be luxury goods, drugs, alcohol. Usually this something of value has to be something you could attach a monetary number to, or potentially, in an abstract way, like a place to stay. So something of value, I talk to young people, is not because I felt like it, right? It's not emotional satisfaction, but they do have to be given something. So again, place to stay is a really big one. Housing insecurity is a really frequent predictor of human trafficking. We've seen a really
Mm.
shocking number of cases where, say, someone's behind on rent and their landlord says, I can make this debt go away for a month if you just give me some time with your 15-year-old daughter, something
Mhm.
like that. So that, again, would be human trafficking, not quote unquote prostitution, because again, that's a minor that cannot consent to that kind of work. And again, something of value for the minor could be just keeping a roof over their head.
Mm.
That's why we also see a lot with the runaway and unhoused children. Um, that's a very frequent something of value. So again, I already hammered this point home because it's important to me, but sex trafficking of minors, again, a minor cannot consent to commercial sex at any time. No force, fraud, or coercion is required. The quote unquote consent of a minor to engage in commercial sex is null and void. It does not matter. When I talk to young people, I emphasize that when an adult and a child interact, it is on the adult to make the good, responsible choices. You know, I don't know about y'all, but I've taught in some pretty challenging schools. You know, I've had some kids swing on me. As the adult in the situation, I understand that I can't swing back, and I wouldn't want to because that is a child. Again, the
Right.
adult has to make the good choices. So again, I just say this because we also sometimes run into this one with law enforcement. Again, this whole idea, well, she was 15, but she agreed to it. Doesn't matter. You know, all the way up to 17 and 364 days old, that is still under 18. And therefore, that would be sex trafficking if they are engaging in sex in exchange for something. Vulnerabilities, again, I'm not going to read all these. It's pretty much anything you can imagine would make a person vulnerable in society. So could be, again, lack of housing, could be lack of family support. We see a lot of people who have been system involved at some point, whether that's DSS, DJJ, something like that, foster care, substance abuse, disabilities. Unfortunately, we know that young people with disabilities are both more likely to be targeted for these sorts of crimes and less likely to be believed when they make a report that something is going on. So any of the above can be vulnerabilities to trafficking. We always want to be careful about this topic though, because we recognize that it can happen to anyone, anywhere. You know, we don't ever want to create the impression that there's any type of person or group of people who are immune to this sort of thing. You know, we've seen it in every type of person, every type of household, every type of neighborhood you can imagine.
Mm.
Now, this is why I give content warnings too, because I know this is brutal. But the fact of the matter is, nationally, about 1/3 of children who are sex trafficked, and at our state, it's even higher. It's about 45 to 50% are trafficked by a family member.
Mm.
So the way this works and the way it's worked in the case where I really got a crash course through this as a teacher was typically abuse has been normalized in the home. So it might start with a parent who is sexually abusing a child, and that becomes normalized. That becomes part of that child's life. I've heard all kinds of excuses, you know, about how the parents groom their own children and teach them that this is quote unquote normal. After that, once it's normal to them, they can start bringing in other people, and that's where the sex trafficking component comes in. It can be
Mm.
generational. We will talk about mandated reporter, but this does not always follow typical grooming patterns because this is somebody who's already in that child's life. They are already known, they are already trusted. So these can be a little tougher. That said, the vast majority of these cases do involve truancy at some point. You know, those kids who just drop off the face of the earth. I know about every couple of years as a teacher, I had at least one of those. 93% have some sort of, again, system involvement, welfare, DSS, DJJ, foster care, something like that. Also with mandated reporting, this is a really important time to remind people that the people in these situations can feel an intense sense of loyalty and even love to their trafficker. So people can very much recognize that maybe they are being abused, but that they still love their abuser. So we'll
Mm.
talk about it with the reporting piece, but just please be careful, especially in these types of situations. Please do not badmouth this person in front of the child. You know, please use as much tact as humanly possible. I know it's really hard in a situation like this, but you can really break trust with that child if you go too far. 2014 legislation, this is another slide. I'm not reading the whole thing. The short version is trafficking used to fall under the umbrella of maltreatment, and therefore it was really hard to charge if the parents or guardians or whomever weren't involved. 2018, it just separates human trafficking from child maltreatment, so it does not create a presumption of guilt on the part of the parents. We have seen plenty of cases with children where something maybe happens online and the parents have done everything that they should. They're just not aware because it's happening online. Now, we have our landscape of human trafficking in South Carolina. Couple caveats with this kind of data. Again, it's a newer crime. It can be underreported. It can be misclassified. Usually I'm not the one dealing with it. Usually it's like our prosecutors and our other attorney staff. But again, we hear the phrase child prostitute all the time. And again, buzzer noise, that should not be happening, right? But if someone sees that and assumes, oh, that's a child prostitute, like I'm not going to do anything, that's not my business, that can cause people to under-recognize this sort of thing.
Mm.
So, SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, some counties do handle trafficking cases. Most of them go up to SLED. In 2025, they they got 315 tips involving 323 victims. Of those, and we see this year over year, the vast majority, this blue over here, is children. 234 out of 323. Tips open by area. That's lovely. This data is lovely. I always remind people this can be kind of a double-edged sword with this data. It doesn't necessarily indicate that, oh, there's so much trafficking happening in, say, Greenville. It could also be they have more robust systems of awareness and reporting. So this can kind of go either way. So again, if you're in one of these counties, it's one of the top ones, Berkeley, Charleston, Greenville, Richland, we're definitely not saying shame on you. This can certainly be, again, a really good thing because people are aware of it. People are noticing it. People are keeping their eyes open. They're making those mandated reports, and they're getting law enforcement involved when they need to be involved. Now, we also have a wonderful partner at both DSS and DJJ. Our screener at DSS found 159 cases. Again, these are children who were already going through the DSS system and flagged as victims of human trafficking as well. This is another one too, overwhelmingly sex trafficking, mostly female. That is a growing number as far as the percentage of males. It used to be about 1 out of 10. Now we're averaging year over year about 1 out of 5. And again, we think that's just better awareness and better stereotype breaking. There is this stereotype that like it only happens to girls. And we know increasingly that's not true. We also know there are a lot of barriers in place for young males trying to report. There can be that internalized shame. One thing I talk about again with adults and absolutely not with the children, and you'll know why, is some of these stereotypes we have around sexual abuse. So on one hand, this idea, oh, if a boy is sexually abused by another male, that must mean he's gay. But then if he's abused by a female and he doesn't like it because it's sexual abuse and you shouldn't, then he's also gay. So just there's all sorts of stigmas, whether that's homophobia, whether that's gender norms, whether that's this idea that males should just be tough enough to defend for themselves. But we are trying to make sure that people understand it is not just a women and girls issue or women and children. It is all sorts of people, again, every race, religion, gender, socioeconomic status, urban, rural, anybody you can imagine. We'll also say, again, I'm not going into the grisly details. DSS was lovely enough to provide an age group breakdown. As we see, the youngest were in the 0 to 2 age group. We did have 2 victims of trafficking in 2025 that were recognized by DSS. Under 3. Now, we do see the vast majority are in those middle and high school ages. But again, if you're here and you are an elementary school teacher, thank you. And unfortunately, to burst your bubble a little bit, like there's no age range that this doesn't happen at. Yeah. All right. Again, I don't get into grisly details. That's why I kind of stick with raw numbers. But
yeah.
This is what we're seeing, man. DJJ has also been doing a great job of screening for human trafficking. In part, again, like I alluded to earlier, the difference in the eyes of the law between a victim and an offender. And if someone's a victim of human trafficking and they're recognized as such and they're going through DJJ, that can switch how that person is going to be treated by the legal system. And therefore, we can completely change how we're viewing that child and give them different services that they might need more. So DJJ, Um, all the kids they saw in 2025, 56 were recognized as victims of human trafficking. Once again, mostly girls. Number one offense is runaway. I like to point that out for a couple reasons. First of all, I was going to say as we know, but not everyone's a legal geek like I am or like I had to become for this job. Runaway is what's called a status offense. Status offenses are the things that are really only illegal for children. If I decide to dip out on my friends and family and everyone who knows me, I'm 40 years old, I am allowed to do that. A 16-year-old is not allowed to do that. That is something they can get in trouble for. It is called runaway. Likewise, some of the most common offenses include incorrigible and wait, where is it? Oh, the other one didn't make the list. But incorrigible, same thing. If I go to work and just have like a bad attitude with everybody and start arguing with all my friends and family all the time and just don't do what I'm supposed to, not really breaking any laws. With a child, that can be called incorrigible.
Mm.
Now, with both of these, I also think it's crucial to recognize that these can overlap with human trafficking, especially with runaway being the most prevalent offense. We see instances where a child, again, if they're being trafficked by a family member, like about half of the cases in South Carolina are, they could be running away from that person. On the flip side, we also see a lot of trafficking happening with romantic partners. So this could be someone, and a lot of trafficking when it's a romantic partner very much mirrors patterns of relational abuse. And if you happen to know anyone who's gone through that, one of those common tactics is that whole thing of, I love you, you can trust me, you can't trust these other people around you. So a
Mm.
lot of these kids are also, running not just away from a trafficker, but they could be running to a trafficker if that is that relational person. Again, boyfriend, pimp, sugar daddy, like whatever kind of casual language we would use to refer to that, all of those can be just abusive traffickers.
Mm. Mm.
Now, it's grim, it's dark. I know that's a lot, so thank you for that. That said,
Yeah.
we're going to get to the more solution-oriented part of the presentation. Like I said, I'm not going to leave you just thinking all is lost and call it a night. So we do have TraffickProof SC. It's a curriculum we made in partnership with SCE TV. It is for 8th through 12th grade students. We have trainings for school personnel. This does cover the 8th grade and high school health standards. We also touch on Gavin's Law, Aaron's Law, all that good stuff. Now, what that looks like is it's 4 modules. It says 45 minutes. I'm kind of a talker. It's more like an hour when you've got me. But they are about 4 different topics. Again, we can do one, we can do all 4, whatever the needs of the school are. Like I just had a school that called me and they had me come and just do this presentation over and over and over. And it was just module 2 about staying safe online. That's fine. We would rather come to a school and do something than nothing. But the modules are what is human trafficking? It's kind of just a big overview like I'm doing right now. But in terms that like our 8th graders and our middle and high school students understand. Next, we talk about staying safe online. Then we have labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Most of these modules do also include a Gavin's Law component. Again, Gavin's Law is our law about sextortion. Schools should have some sort of education in place for that. But again, if you don't, or if you would just rather have someone else show up and help you with that, I'm more than happy to do that. And again, we are approved by the Department of Education as an Aaron's Law resource, so we can meet those legal requirements. Every module starts with a pretest. We have a little introduction. We have some discussion. We have a little icebreaker topic. We have a video, which those are the ones made in partnership with SCE TV. Then we go over scenarios. So those scenarios might look like, is this human trafficking? Why or why not? Some of the scenarios might look like, okay, if this was happening to your friend, what would you do? What would you say? What would that look like? We always remind people how to get help. If they haven't gotten that talk from their teacher, I am a really big proponent of mandated reporter, talking about all of that. But again, letting these kids know that you're not on your own and that if something like this is happening, again, this just really hits home for me because of the kids I've worked with. I can like picture their names and faces, reminding them that this is not their fault because overwhelmingly this is able to happen to children because they are taught it is their fault.
Right.
You did something wrong, or this is a secret we're sharing together, or hey, this is wrong, but you're doing it too, so therefore you're responsible as well. So just reminding kids that that's not the case, and that there are people who are able to help them if they or someone they know is going through something like this. We also do tabling events if we need to. We have a newsletter, we have flyers and postcards that we can send out. We are working on a poster project. That one seems to keep getting pushed back, but we are fierce and mighty and determined. We can also talk about human trafficking overview for school personnel. I will say I got a call from an elementary school because of a really unfortunate incident that they were able to narrowly avert involving a 10-year-old girl. And they asked me if I could do traffic proof for their kids, and I told them, thank you, absolutely not. This is not age appropriate for them. So
Right.
instead, what I did was a training for all of their staff and any parents who wanted to show up during school hours. I would just show up and present to them as well. So we can do any of the above. My master's degree is in trauma informed education. So if you need some help in that area too, we can talk about that. We talk about vicarious trauma. I think that's something that's really important for me. We have navigating digital risks, and then just like facilitator training on the traffic proof curriculum. So based on popular demand, we are working on a phase 2. We do take feedback, and we've listened to that feedback, and part of it was when we go to youth who are system involved, whether that's DSS, DJJ, it wasn't hitting for these kids. They didn't like it, frankly. It just didn't match their experience. So one of our things with TraffickProof SC version 2 is recognizing those experiences as well, and that not everyone's going to have the same school experience, especially a child who
Right.
might have been system involved since middle school. Also, based on popular feedback, we are working on Spanish language, both subtitled and dubbed with our videos. And we're working on a parent videos and an online resource directory. Now, for those of us in education, there are some red flags we can look out for, and I'm going to assume everyone on this call is a mandated reporter. If you are not sure whether you're a mandated reporter or not, just assume that you are. If you work with kids, just assume that you're a mandated reporter. Also, something I like to remind people of is that DSS accepts all reports from anybody at any time. It doesn't matter whether you're a mandated reporter or not, you can still make a report. So all that to say, a lot of these, if you remember your mandated reporter training, might be pretty similar to some of the red flags you've been taught for mandated reporter, like unexplained injuries. Again, classic example being like a kid comes in with a handprint-shaped bruise on their face and says, oh, I walked into a door. And you're thinking, well, a doorknob isn't that height, doorknob isn't shaped that way. Like that doesn't add up, right? Like that just doesn't seem right. This is another one I've seen happen with one of my students, and it turns out, yeah, something bad was happening at home. But kids who just suddenly start wearing very sexually provocative clothing, or just clothing that's inappropriate for the weather or situation. Branding or tattoos. I have several myself, and I've talked about this with my artist. Kids shouldn't have those. That is an automatic instant red flag. That is a concern. Unable to make decisions without approval. So if they have to ask somebody, but it's, not mom and dad or grandma or, whatever adult them to be living with, again, that's a red flag. Claim of an older boyfriend or girlfriend. As I tell teachers, a child should not have a quote unquote sugar daddy. That's not how any of this should work. So, and I say that because I've heard this from high school teachers. That is an automatic red flag. And again, if they have hotel keys, rolls of cash, multiple phones, refillable gift cards, any of the stuff that they can't really you can't really understand why, or doesn't make sense, that could be a potential red flag as well. Now, all of that to say, we'll get into it, but I'm going to get ahead of myself. Please keep in mind, red flag, just like with mandated reporter, does not mean proof positive. So, I had a student who I knew was one of our McKinney-Vento students, and I knew they were currently going through a housing situation where they were staying at a hotel. So if that little girl had a hotel key, I know her enough to know, okay, that's normal for her. Like that's where her family is staying right now. But again, if it's not normal for that child. One of the specialties as educators is getting to know our kids. I made really strong connections with our kids, and it's corny and cliche, but that's one of the things I miss the most about leaving the classroom. So because we have these connections, we know what is normal for this child. We know what their behavior looks like. We know what they normally dress like. We know how they act. If something suddenly just isn't right with this kid, that should be on our radar pretty quickly. Now, again, sex trafficking gets talked about a lot with minors. In part, it's also easier because, again, you don't need that force, fraud, or coercion piece. But just a reminder, again, labor trafficking. So if they're in a job but staying there because of force, fraud, or coercion, that can also count. There was a recent one in the state that I'm not really able to get into too many details about yet. It's been a bit in the news. But there were kids, I think like age 10 to 14, who were cleaning a movie theater overnight. They didn't want to do it. It was against their will. And one of the red flags was just the fact that these kids were falling asleep in class all the time. They're working till, in some cases, I think it was as late as 3 a.m. So that is labor trafficking. They did not want to be there. And yet they were forced to, right? So other red flags can be someone who might be living at their workplace. If someone's on a farm and living at the farm, that's a little outdated, unless they're the owner of the farm, right? But if they're just one of the workers and living at the farm, that's a little strange. And I say that because not to single out farms, but that is the type of labor we see that happen a lot. Anybody who's regularly transported to and from work by their employer, if it happens once or twice, that's fine. Whatever. If your car breaks down and your boss gives you a ride, cool, whatever. But if it's happening every day, that's a bit of a red flag. That's usually not, generosity on the part of the boss. That's usually an attempt to limit that person's movement. Anybody, like with the movie theater example, anybody working excessively long or unusual hours, if you have a 12-year-old who's working till 3 a.m., you may not have a ton of familiarity with South Carolina's labor laws because they're super complex, but something should be going off, like a little hair in the back of your neck should be standing up saying that is a weird set of hours for a child to be working, right? And it is. Anybody who has to be always available on demand for their boss. So if you are working at the high school level where they can drive themselves to and from, and suddenly they have to leave because they're being called to work, that could be a potential red flag. That's, again, usually not what we like to see. And again, if it's an employer who's legitimate, they should be respecting that child's school hours. All right, debt bondage. So anybody who's working off a large debt to their employer, we see this usually with either country to country or like city to city travel, where somebody might accept a job that is somewhere else. Their employer tells them, okay, I'll cover your travel expenses. And then that person gets there and suddenly the employer says, oh, by the way, you now have to work off, thousands and thousands of dollars that you owe me that I didn't tell you about before. Again, that is a type of fraud.
Right.
Goods or services are priced below general market rates. So again, if a child tells you they're working for pennies an hour at their job, that's a little unusual, right? Conversely, I always tell people, again, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If somebody tells you they're, going to be washing dishes and they've been promised $200 an hour, that should be sending off alarm bells for you, right? Like we should be talking to that kid about how that's not a normal amount to be paying somebody and that maybe this isn't legitimate. Maybe this isn't safe. And again, labor trafficking, the big thing is people who want to leave their job but can't because of that force, fraud, or coercion piece. So if they try to leave and they are threatened in any way, whether that's physical force, whether that's blacklisting, we do have blacklisting laws in South Carolina, any of that sort of stuff. We've seen instances where people, somebody's working at a restaurant and this dishwasher was trying to leave and his boss would physically assault him every time he tried to do so. So he couldn't quit because he was scared. Now, all that leads to mandated reporter. You will notice a lot of these red flags are similar to red flags for other types of child maltreatment. So if you have those kids with the mystery bruises, kids who are just falling asleep every day and you can't really understand why or what that's about or what the deal is, sudden shifts in mood, When I was a middle school teacher, I went at whatever grade level they needed me. So some students I taught 3 years in a row. And sometimes, year three, that would be a different person. And not just the growing up aspect of it all, but just this feeling of something's wrong.
Right.
And, again, the case I'm thinking of in particular, unfortunately, we were right that something was deeper, going on in the home that should not have been. Traffic does qualify as a mandated reporting offense if the victim is a child or vulnerable adult. I would also like to add a little asterisk too, if you're working with kids who are just freshly 18, if you have, reason to believe that there is a younger child in that house. So if you think like an 18-year-old student is being sex trafficked, if they are forced to engage in sex acts, and then also they're living with a 16-year-old, younger sibling, that could fall under mandated reporter, right? Because that child is still in that house where that kind of behavior is happening. A couple reminders again, red flags are not proof. With all due respect, again, I'm saying this as a former classroom teacher. I'm saying this with the most love in my heart. Teachers are not superheroes. I know all the mugs say that, but please don't try to do everything on your own. Please just respectfully stay in your lane. You don't need to launch a full investigation yourself. You only need good faith belief to make that report. Especially with something like this where sexual abuse can be obviously a very delicate issue. We do just urge people to proceed with caution and just make that report. You don't need to sit that child down and ask them 1,000 questions. You just need that good faith and report away. Like I referenced earlier, but I say this a lot because I've seen it. Victims of abuse can love their abuser. They may or may not recognize that it's abuse because, again, it could have been normalized in the house. This could be just what they think happens in every child's house. Or it could be that they know this is wrong, but they still love this person. This is mom, this is dad, this is my soccer coach, this is my cool aunt, this is my pastor. This is somebody who I still love and respect because they've been in my life for so long. So again, if a report comes up, please be careful. We don't want to condemn that person too much in front of the child or say anything like, oh, I want to go punch that person in the throat. Maybe you do, and that's valid. But please don't say that in front of the child because, again, you can break that trust with them because they might have very complicated feelings toward this person. And just a reminder, because, again, I've seen it. Reporting internally does not satisfy mandated reporting requirements. So just telling an administrator, a counselor, just going to the school nurse and saying, hey, Timmy has weird bruises, can you check it out? Your job doesn't end there. Like, you still have to make that mandated report. And now that other person does as well because they've been brought into this. So again, you can talk to someone internally, like if there is someone who you feel like a counselor, a school social worker who is better equipped to handle this, but you still have to make that report. We also remind people, please report as soon as humanly possible. If you have reason to believe that that person who is abusing the child is in the home with them and they are about to go back home to this person, please do it immediately, whatever that looks like, whether that is having the kids work quietly at their desks while you just pull up your laptop real quick, whether that is having someone cover your classroom while you make that phone call, please do that. And this is more advice for you rather than the kids. Please document your report. We have seen cases where whether the mandated report was made comes into question. So for yourself, for your own good, in a very private place, please document that report. We also recommend calling, if you can, over the online portal, because calling also allows you to talk to a person, get that person's name. Please do that. Name, date, time, who you talk to, maybe some initials or something, but still keep it private about like what the child's name was that you called about. But again, please document because I don't love it, but I have seen cases where, again, it does come into question whether someone made a mandated report or not.
Blake, I'd like to just pause here for a moment because I'm viewing this through the eyes of an educator, and I haven't been in the classroom in 15 years, but I'm imagining this may be some questions that they have. One is, First of all, who specifically should they be reporting to? Is it the police, the Department of Social Services, both? Who should they be submitting this report to specifically?
Yeah, no, great question. Um, I think I used to have a little flow chart in this presentation, but it's either DSS or local law enforcement. Um, if it is certain people, like if it is a caregiver, it should be DSS. If it's someone other than a caregiver, technically it should be local law enforcement. That said, I don't always want to get too into the weeds of that because I don't want someone to ever be paralyzed and not know who to report to, but
Okay.
just either is fine.
And
Um,
the other question I have for you
yes.
is, I'm imagining I'm a high school teacher, and I have kids who are dressing provocatively or have tattoos, and now I'm hearing that's a red flag, and then I'm wondering, do I am I mandated to report that? I know as a teacher, if a student comes to me and says, I'm being abused or I'm being trafficked, I'm going to report that. Anything obvious, I think educators know. I think there are these there can be these sort of gray areas where you're like, well, I, I I'm watching this presentation and I'm seeing that tattoos and provocative clothing, and
Mhm.
they're acting a little strangely. At what point does it reach a threshold where you're now legally mandated to report that versus I suspect it, but I don't think I have enough here to that's like you said, proof that there's anything going on. How do you know where that line is drawn? If you can help us sort of sort that out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, all the law says is just good faith reason to believe in your professional capacity. So, if you just happen to see a child with a tattoo, or some kids just dress provocatively, I I always think about this like middle school girl who was like 6 feet tall in middle school, and her shorts were always too short, and she was getting sent home. But also, it's context, right? So in that case, I'm recognizing, okay, well, she's unusually tall for a girl. Like girls' shorts are just too short for her.
Right.
So I personally, just in the context, knowing everything I know about that child, in a lot of other contexts too, I wouldn't have made a report based on just that, based on her shorts being kind of short, because I know other things going on. Or like I said earlier about the hotel keys, like that could be a red flag, but also, again, I know McKinney-Vento kids who were temporarily staying in those kinds of situations. So I would say just look at the overall big picture of that child.
Mm,
If it's just one or two of those lesser red flags, like a tattoo or something, again, if they're 18, they can get one. But
right.
maybe keep that child on your radar. Keep your ears extra open with that child in all your interactions.
I guess what I'm looking for though, Blake, is I hear what you're saying. I guess what I'm wondering is, and I hate to, you know, kind of nitpick on this, but I feel like there's a lot of teachers who are thinking, what point, at what, how many of these red flags, and what point am I then now going to be in trouble if I don't report this? Like, what is the threshold for if I don't report this? You may start to build, but you're not sure. Okay, where's the threshold? I mean, I know you can say it's common sense, but it feels like we need a little bit more clarity on at what point is it like you have to report that? Like this, like you're going to be legally in trouble if you don't.
Right, right. Um, Again, I hate to go back to it because it's what the law says, and I know the law is written in a way that some people do find confusing, and it is kind of open to interpretation because I think to some degree it is meant to be. But any of that good faith reason to report, I would like to remind people too that there are legal protections in place that if you erroneously report, like you are still protected, and they can just tell you, okay, that's unfounded. Especially someone
Right.
working for the Attorney General's office in the Human Trafficking Task Force, we always like to remind people that it is better to be safe than sorry. It is better to make that report and just find out that you were wrong. You know,
Yeah.
um,
I do
I
think
had a
it's
similar situation. Oh, sorry.
go ahead. I was
I
going to
was
say I do think it's good for us to highlight again that them going to their administrator, to a guidance counselor, is not a report. You may confer with them and talk with them about it, but that's not an actual report. And since you're a mandated reporter, the mandate is not that you just tell somebody else in the building. And I know you said that, but I just want to highlight that, especially for our early career educators who may
Mhm.
not be aware. That's a really important point to make there. You were going to say something
Right.
of an example that you have.
I was just going to say, from my experience, you might make the parents mad. Like, they're going to be mad at you. That's how it's going to be. But, you know, legally, if you make a mandated report, and again, it is in your professional capacity and it is in good faith, and you make a mandated report and you're wrong, you cannot face career consequences. You can't be told, oh, you can't, or we're going to fire you. Oh, these parents got mad because you made a mandated report. Um, Technically, they're not supposed to give your name. We do remind people, though, like, if it's like K through 5, and like a lot of those K through 5, maybe they only have one
Mm,
teacher. So there's nothing to stop the parent from deducing. But that said, you cannot suffer legal consequences. You cannot suffer career consequences. You cannot suffer any of that stuff if it is a good faith report. Um,
yeah,
as far as where that line is, again, the law just says reason to believe. So I do just, I would say stick to just the overall context of how much you know about this child. Um, the more of a relational teacher, like I was a big relationship building teacher,
yeah,
the more you know about that child, the better, because then you're going to be able to have a better feel for this is okay, or I know a reason why this is happening. Oh, their mood shifted, but I'm thinking of
yeah.
another example. This child's mood drastically changed, but
Hmm.
it's because he told me his parents are going through a really nasty divorce.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
okay, so in that case, like, okay, maybe that's not a red flag for me. But if someone's just mood changes and maybe you don't know why, pull on that relationship you have with that child. You know, t- you know, you don't have to necessarily ask, "Hey, what's going on?" But just letting them know that you're here, you're a good listener, you're someone who's going to care for them, and will take care of them if something's happening that shouldn't be. But that you're always available as just an open
yeah,
ear and an open heart.
yeah. I think that's such an important point, and it's one of the core reasons that
Mhm,
relationship building is so critical for educators. And I know so many times we want to just focus on the standards and the curriculum, because that's how we're evaluated. But those relationships, we're talking about a human piece to this, which is so important. And that relationship that you build and that trust that you can develop with that student,
mhm.
it could be a life-saving investment of your time and effort. So I want to just encourage educators to do that. But I'm going to bring your presentation back up. I didn't mean to interrupt your flow, but I felt like that was kind of an important thing for us to just kind of flesh out a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was gonna. Is it just off the screen? My
You're good.
last little bullet point here was going to be just being an adult they can trust. So taking the extra time to build a relationship with that child, if they have an interest, like take interest in them. When I was new to teaching, if there are new teachers here, one of the things I did was I had a little post-it note on my screen that the kids couldn't see. And it was a reminder of just my roster, and just, okay, student number one is Alex, in block one, and then it's Cassandra in block two, and yada, yada, yada. But just going through and just spending a little extra time with those kids.
Yeah.
And, by the time you've had enough weeks of school with them, like, you would have gone through your entire class at least a couple times.
Right.
Um, but just checking in with that kid, asking how they're doing, hey, why can't I think of a single intellectual property for children? Frozen. You got Elsa on your backpack. You like Frozen? Me too. That's so cool, But just
Right.
even little things like that gradually build over time. I could spend a whole nother hour on relationship building with kids.
Yeah.
But again,
Yeah.
just letting them know that you are more than your job title, that you are a human person,
Yeah.
that you have interests, and maybe you share some interests with them and you can bond over that. I'm a middle-aged adult who loves Pokemon, and that was a great entry point
Yeah.
for a lot of my middle school
Right.
boys in
Right.
particular.
Right. Right. In my day, it was Magic the Gathering.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Still is.
Yeah. Yeah. I always, yeah, it was fun. Um, do you have other slides that you wanted to show? I'm sorry.
Um, Literally two more, and they're really
Two
quick because
more.
it's
Okay. Okay.
a
Okay. I'll let
recording
you.
piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Please
Um,
go ahead.
so yeah, if you learn anything, again, the legal terms, the two big parts here are in your professional capacity, and it gives you reason to believe that human trafficking or other maltreatment may be occurring. Please follow state and agency mandated reporter guidelines. Again, any internal policy, like i.e. your workplace policy, does not override the law of the state of South Carolina. You still have to do both.
Yeah.
So law enforcement, call 911 or your local police, whoever they are. DSS is 1-888-CARE-4-US or dss.sc.gov. If you are outside of your professional capacity, if you're just driving around on the weekend and see something funky, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline or you can contact SLED. They have a tip line as well. And then, very last thing, I promise.
No, it's good.
Reminder about me, Prevention Education Program Coordinator. My email address and phone number are there. Some of the stuff I can do. Again, we can talk about TraffickProof SC. We can do training kind of like this for staff or families. I am a certified mandated reporter trainer as well. I do always want to be very careful with the legalese of that because I don't want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
sound like I'm giving legal advice. But I can
Right.
go over just again what that looks like, the types of abuse and maltreatment that I recognize in South Carolina. That's way more depth and detail than I went into just now. And we also have a newsletter that people can sign up for if they'd like as well. Um,
Excellent.
but yeah, that bullet point that just scooted right off the page on this one, um, just being a trusted adult, reminding them that they can always, talk to you, reminding them that you are here to listen. If something
Right.
feels off, maybe don't pry too much, but just letting them know your door is always open.
Yeah.
Sometimes literally.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a difficult thing, and I know this work has got to be heavy for you at times, and this is a heavy subject, but I appreciate the way the information that you shared, and I appreciate what you're doing, because it's really important. If we can save these young people and prevent them from ever having to go through this, I mean, it's
Yeah,
heartbreaking to think about. And I know people watching this, they're just heartbroken thinking about it. And but what you're doing and is important. And if we can just inform more people to be aware of these red flags and to report things when they have concerns, it's going to hopefully prevent some of this from happening. It's a tragedy that it happens once, but the stats you shared are just really eye opening, and hopefully people will take the time to contact you if they want more training for their staff. If people are interested in learning more, they have your contact information. And Blake, thank you so much for reaching out and
yeah,
connecting
thank
with
you.
us and helping us understand a little bit more about this important topic. Thank you, Blake.
Absolutely. Yeah,
All
anytime.
right. All right. Take care.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everybody. That was Blake Easter, and I just want to reiterate my gratitude to him for the work that he's doing, and we will try to put his contact information in the comments so that you can follow up with him if you'd like to learn more about Traffic Proof SC, a very important program and an important thing for us to be on our radars as educators. If we have that knowledge and we see these red flags, it's so important for us to step in and make sure that these kids are protected. Heartbreaking, but very important information. Coming up, a couple of things. First of all, if you are an early career educator, we have something called Cool Coaching. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, you can go online at cool.us/coaching. It's free. It's online. It's one-to-one. You won't be in a group. You can go at any time between 6 and 8. So you don't have to go for the full 2 hours. You can just go in, pop in, and they will put you in a separate room, a breakout room with Angie, Stephanie, or Marcella. And these are veteran educators who can give you some really good advice. They'll listen. They'll share their thoughts and ideas, and they do it in an unbiased way and a non-threatening way. So if you're interested in that, you don't have to be